In this lesson, we're going to be talking about converting using a tool called Hackbar. Now, Hackbar is an addition to Firefox, and you can actually see it here. It's just a toolbar that goes on top of the screen. And actually, in order to demonstrate how you would use Hackbar, I'm actually going to make use of another tool called TamperData. What I want to do at this point is I'm going to go to a website, and it's going to ask me to log in, and I'm going to get it unauthorized. What I really want to show you here is how to use Hackbar. What I'm going to do is I'm going to look for the response, and that's what I want to get here. This right here is actually base64 encoded. So I'm going to go up here, and I've just copied that, and I'm going to paste it in, and I want to get rid of this part here. I really just want the base64 encoding. I'm going to say base64 decode, and actually it's going to pop up here, and I'm going to paste what I had into the dialog box here, and get rid of the authentication equals basic. And let me get rid of this now. You can see what it did was it pasted it in here. If you've got something that's base64 decoded, then you could use Hackbar to very quickly decode it for you. And I could also do an encoding here, where if I were to type, let's just say user password. And now I want to encode that, and let's get rid of the previous one here so it's out of the way. And this is what user password would look like if they were concatenated together with a colon in between them and they were base64 encoded. This is how you would use Hackbar in order to do different conversions. You can see we could do hex encoding, we could do URL encoding and decoding. A lot of handy different tools that we've got with Hackbar here. And if you've got some data that looks like it's been encoded in a particular way, Hackbar will give you the ability to very quickly decode that. In this lesson, we're going to take a look at how you would manage cookies using the plugin FireCookie. And actually, FireCookie has been rolled into Firebug, so we're really just going to take a look at Firebug and go to the cookies inside Firebug. I'm just going to bring up a website here, then I'm going to load Firebug and we'll take a look at it. I'm just going to go to Google. I know Google has cookies. And now I'm going to open up Firebug over here, and I'm going to take a look at the cookies. Right here you can see the cookies that I've got. Now, immediately, if I go to this menu here, you can see that I could actually create a cookie, and I could remove cookies. I could also export cookies for this site. And it's going to give me a text file here, and I'm just going to export those. Now I've got a text file with all of the cookies in them. I can also open up here and see the cookie and see its value. And I could also do an edit on this. And it's going to give me a name, the host. I could do some playing around here. Do that, for example, and then, just for giggles, let's just change the cookie around. I could do that, for example. Now, one thing that I could do pretty easily here is if I've got a session cookie, what I may be able to do is copy the cookie out, and you could see I could actually copy this cookie here. Or I could send it off to a text file, and then what I could do would be to create a cookie on another system and see whether I could use that cookie in order to gain access to the website using that cookie. I've got the ability to do some changing of how I manage the cookies. I could deny cookies from Google.com, accept cookies, accept session cookies, and then I could break on this particular cookie. I could also delete this cookie, and you can see that that's now gone. FireCookie or Firebug actually gives us a lot of ability to manage cookies or manipulate cookies in particular ways. And certainly there are other ways of doing it, and you could go to the file system potentially and get into the database that Firefox, as an example, uses and manages its cookies in that way. Or you could just use a plugin like Firebug and go to the Cookies tab and just browse away to your little heart's content on the different cookies that are there. Now, different sites use more cookies or sometimes less cookies than others. Let's just take a look at Apple and see what kind of cookies that we get there. And you can see we cleared the tab out when we move to a different site. We haven't loaded up the cookies yet, and now we've actually got the cookies loaded up. And you can see the large number of cookies that actually get set here. And we could actually change the orientation as an example. I could edit this cookie. And what happens if we change this orientation here? And then just go back to the site, do a reload. And in this case, it's probably not going to do much of anything. But I could change orientation, and actually it put the cookie back to the way that it wanted it. So obviously that's not stored in any way. This is actually a session cookie now that I look at it a little bit closer. This is only valid for the session that we're in. If I look over here, I can see the path. I can also see the expires date and time on all of these cookies. And you can see that this one is good for actually just about right now when the cookie was actually created. I've got a lot of ability here to take a look at cookies and do a lot of manipulation, which may allow me to gain access in an unauthorized fashion to a system by maybe grabbing somebody else's cookies and inserting it into where I want it. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about getting started up with Metasploit. So I've actually got a copy of Metasploit Pro here, and the company Rapid7 makes Metasploit as well as Nexpose, and Rapid7 not only has the more advanced versions with additional features like the Pro version here, they also have community versions as well. You can get started with Metasploit or Nexpose and get slightly less features, but still have the ability to do some pretty powerful things. I'm getting into the web interface here. I just want to show you quickly around the web interface, and then I'm going to go do the command line version, and we're going to do some work inside the command line version. Here's Metasploit Pro. And you can see I've got the ability to do lookups on hosts and provide notes. Take a look at the services that we've got. We can start up a new project, for example, and I could have a project name of, and I'm going to use the network range here, and now I can just go create that project. Now I've got a project, and we could actually do some things like some scanning, for example, and once we had some hosts, we could do some other things. What I want to do, though, is I actually want to run the console. And I'm going to get into the console, and we're going to be doing a lot of work inside the console with command line. It's not that I couldn't use the web interface to do what we're going to do. I'm a little more comfortable with the command line. It's just what I prefer. Certainly you can use the web interface to do what we're going to be doing. It's pretty easy to use. There are some cases where we might actually use the web interface going forward, but right now what I want to do is just get started in the console version. What I actually want to do is actually want to create a workspace. And it looks like the project we created through the web interface has been built into a workspace here for us. We're going to actually make use of that workspace. Now I'm in that workspace. Now there's a number of different things that I could do to get started here. What I want to do is do a little bit of scanning and show you how to do some Nmap scans from Metasploit as well as some service-based scans. And we'll do that coming up in the next couple of lessons. In this lesson, we're going to be doing a little bit of scanning using Metasploit. Now, I'm in the MSF console, and I've got that started up. I've actually switched into the workspace that I want to be working on here. And what I want to do at this point is I want to run an Nmap scan. I'm going to do an Nmap scan very similarly to what I would do on the command line or using ZenMap. It has the same switches that Nmap does because it's really just passing it off into Nmap directly. Same workings of how Nmap would work on the command line. In this case, though, I'm using a DB underscore because the results are actually going to get populated inside of Nmap's database. I'm going to do a SYN scan. I want to do an operating system scan as well. And I actually want to do 172.30.42.17 is the system I'm going to scan. It's going to run off and do the Nmap scan, and it's going to take a look at all of the ports that are open and then do an operating system guess. And you can see we've got the results here, and we've got a couple of ports that are open. Now that I've actually got some information populated in the database, I can take a look at what's in the database. If I type host, now I've got that one system in my hosts file or hosts part of the database. I can also take a look at the services that are there, and you can see these are the services otherwise known as ports, although we've got some service names here as well. Now, I could, just for the fun of it, I could actually do another scan here, just to have a little something extra to populate the database with. We're going to do another database scan, and then we'll have a couple of hosts in here that we'll be able to play with a little bit, and we'll have some additional services. Now I could do services here, and now I've got a number of different ports that are open. Now, coming up, I want to do some service scanning and do some scanning based around particular services. And in that case, I'm going to be looking across a whole network rather than just some individual hosts. We'll take a look at that, and we'll also be doing some working with Nessus so that we could look at vulnerabilities. Well, I could look at vulnerabilities within the database, too. Just type vulns, but I don't actually have a vulnerability scan that's been imported in yet, so there's no information populated in the database at this point. We'll be doing that coming up in the next few lessons. In this lesson, I want to be talking about service scanning with Metasploit. There's a number of different services that there are scanners built into Metasploit for. What I want to do is just do a search on scan, and if I scroll up a little bit here, I should find things that say auxiliary scanner. I'm going to find a number of different scanners that are available, and let's just do this right now. I want to do an SSH version scan, just to save typing, although I could do a tab completion. I'm actually going to do this. I want to use the SSH version. Now I want to show the options that I've got because I need to figure out how I'm actually going to tell the version scanner where to go about scanning. There's the rhosts variable right there, and I could actually change the port. That's remote hosts and remote port. I don't want to change the remote port, but I do want to change the rhosts. I'm going to set rhosts to 172.30.42.0/24. So that's going to scan my entire network. And now I'm just going to run the scanner, and it's going to go off and scan my network for any system that actually has SSH running on it. It's going to run SSH, and it should be getting the SSH version number back. As I said, there are a number of different scanners that are available just built into Metasploit. If you want to figure out whether systems are running a particular service and you don't want to nmap the whole network, you just want to do a very targeted scan, you could use these different scanners that are available. Here's some that are available for VMware. There's TFTP, there's Telnet, and of course we did some with SSH here. There's some war dialing ones for telephony if you needed to do some war dialing. We could be playing around with SNMP as an example. And as I said, there's a lot of different scanners that are available that are just built right into Metasploit. And it will go off, it will find all of the systems on the network, and then it will populate the database with those so that you don't actually have to go run the scans again, because Metasploit will remember it. It will store it in the database. You can quit out of Metasploit, and everything will actually be there. While this is running, I'm actually going to pop back over to the web interface, and I want to take a look at the hosts that are available here. If I pop this open, I've got the host that we had looked at previously in my hosts there. I'm going to go back home at this point. And let's go into Infinite Skills, and we'll take a look at, there's actually two in here. So it's actually in the wrong workspace. So there was a default workspace that I was looking at, and now this is the Infinite Skills workspace. And now that I'm here, I could actually take a look at what we've got available. I've got two hosts that are available that have been discovered so far. And one is my Windows XP box, and there's a Linux box as well. You can see that I can go back and forth between the console or the command line version and the web interface, and what I find in one is going to get populated into the other because it's all using the same database. So you can go back and forth pretty easily here. We have found an SSH server on the network. Actually, it looks like we found two SSH servers, and those should be populated up in the services at some point, as well as being added into the list of hosts. We're going to let this continue to run, and we'll take a look at the different services that we've got when we start digging into trying to do some exploits and various other things. I'm just going to let this run at this point, and we'll take a look at doing some SMB scanning coming up in the next lesson. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about doing some SMB scanning. Now, SMB, or server message block, can be used to gather a lot of information. It's actually how files are shared, how printers are shared, but it's also how systems communicate with one another, and you can do things like get a user list, potentially, or you could get a share list from a system that's doing SMB sharing. We've got the scanners up here. I've done a search for some scanners. What I want to do now is find the SMB scanners and see what we can look for. What I think I want to do here is I want to see if there's some file shares out there that I can potentially take advantage of. I'm going to copy that just so I don't have to type the whole thing. And now I'm going to use SMB enum shares. And again, I'm going to show options just as we have done previously. And I have to set our hosts to be the network that I'm on. 0/24. So I'm going to do the whole network. And now I'm going to do run. I'm actually just going to leave the domain alone and see what we end up coming with. I'm also not going to set the user or the password. I just want to see what we can turn up just by doing something completely unauthenticated and see if we can turn up some shares on the network without providing a username or password. Now, while that's going, we can go back over here and we can take a look at the hosts that we've turned up, because we did turn up some hosts that were running SSH. You can see that we've actually added a couple of systems here. We've added the system at .78 and the system at .51. And if I go to services, we should be able to see a couple of new SSH services. And there they are right there, .51 and .78. This is actually going to take quite a bit of time. Let's go back up and see the other things that we can discover using SMB scanners that are provided by Metasploit just by default. We could do user enumeration and see whether there are lists of users that systems might provide just by poking around on SMB. We could do things like figuring out the domain users. So if they're part of a Windows domain, we may be able to get the domain users. We could do a check for SMB login. We could do local user enumeration. There's local users and those domain users, depending on the type of network that you're on. If you've got Active Directory, for example, on your network, you've got domain users. If you've just got a home network, like I'm working on here, what I would have would be local users, because I don't actually have a domain installed. I don't have a Windows server here at the moment, and so I'm not authenticating against any server. Everything is done locally. I can do some checks for DCE RPC, which is the remote procedure protocol, and that's where you've got services that are being shared out using RPC. We've got a number of things that we could be looking for in terms of possibilities for exploitation. Actually, the RPC may be a good one, where we could see whether there's some RPC programs and whether there's session pipes that are available that we could use to communicate with those programs. That's another good scanner to keep in mind, is the pipe DCE RPC auditor. That's something that we may want to take a look at as well. We'll see here whether we've actually returned anything at the moment, and it does look like we have actually found a system that's doing some sharing, and it looks like we've got a print dollar, and we've got shared docs, and of course the administrative shares that are available under Windows XP. And you may remember that the .17 is actually the XP system. If we go back to the hosts over here, you'll see the .17 is actually the Windows XP system. It's not surprising that we actually were able to get shares off of that system with Windows XP, and earlier there were things called administrative shares, and those administrative shares were there for administrative users to be able to interact with systems. And you could get direct access to any drive that was actually mounted or installed in the computer. We've got C dollar, for example, and that's the C drive. And if there were a D drive, you would have D dollar there as well. Of course, we've got the remote administrative share, which is admin dollar. And the print share, as we mentioned earlier, that's the print dollar that's there. There's another system at .37 that's got some inter-process communication somehow that's available. We'll see what we end up turning up as we plow through here. You can see we're actually getting some results. Even without passing in usernames and passwords, we're actually getting some shares that are on these systems that are available. That may be something that we could poke around with and see whether we could actually get access to some files later on. I'm going to let this continue working, And we'll take a look at some Nessus results and then start playing around with exploitation coming up in the upcoming lessons. In this lesson, we're going to be going over importing Nessus results into Metasploit. The reason for importing Nessus results into Metasploit is because Nessus has gone out and found a number of vulnerabilities. And it's really helpful to have those vulnerabilities inside of Metasploit. We can quickly look up what vulnerabilities were found without having to do a lot of scanning ourselves inside of Metasploit and doing a lot of digging. This saves some time. Having run some Nessus scans, we could actually import those. Now again, this is something that I could do via the web interface. I could just do an import here. And that would give me the ability to go look for a file, and I could actually import it that way. I'm going to do it via the console, which is what we've been using so far. I'm going to go into the workspace that we've been in, and just to keep everything consistent. Now I'm going to do a DB import, and I have given it the file name, so it's importing the Nessus version 1 data. And so it found one host there, and it's going to import that host, and it's going to import everything that it found, from the services to the vulnerabilities, to everything else that was stored inside the Nessus report that was exported from Nessus based on the scan of these two particular systems. Now that I've got that, I can do a host, and there shouldn't be anything new here because we've already done a little bit of scanning of these two particular systems. I've still got .17 and .55. And based on the SSH and the SMB scan, I've actually added a few more systems to the hosts that we've got. Again, I could take a look at services. Here are all of the services that we have found to be available. Now, the thing that I can do that I wasn't able to do before is do vulns. And that's the list of vulnerabilities. Now you can see there's a large number of vulnerabilities that have been located via Nessus, and those are now in the database. I can get out of Metasploit, get out of the console, and those vulnerabilities will remain in the database, so I can come back in anytime. I can pull up the vulnerabilities list, and I could go looking to see what there may be available that I could go after and do a little bit of playing with. I've got my list of everything that's here, and if I were to actually go to my vulnerabilities right here by just mousing over the Analysis tab, now I can select vulnerabilities, and it's going to bring up all of those vulnerabilities in a nice little tabular form, which of course I don't get via the console here. Now, there's a big advantage to looking at them here in that I've got clickable links now to some of the references that we've got. I've got references for all of these vulnerabilities, and I could just take a look at this one here, and it would bring up some data about that particular vulnerability. Now what that did was just brought me to the list of those vulnerabilities, but what I want to do here is pop open NSS 51891. The vulnerability that was turned up was this right here, SSL session resume supported. I can quickly pop open information about each of these vulnerabilities, which is really helpful, so I know kind of what it is that I'm dealing with. And I've got a couple of pages of them, so I can really skim through all of these vulnerabilities and see what we've got here. There are quite a number of the NSS ones, and a lot of these appear to be based on SSH. Now, we've got the MS08067, and if I open that up, that's something that I could take a look at here. there's actually an available exploit for that. From the web interface, I can actually just run that exploit and see whether we can actually make that stick. Again, importing Nessus information gives me some vulnerabilities, which are starting points on how I may be able to go about exploiting a particular system. In coming lessons, we'll be looking at actually exploits and what we can do with them, and then what we can do once we've actually done the exploit. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about making payloads using Metasploit. A payload is something that you would inject into a vulnerable application, and the payload would probably give you some sort of shell access or provide a way to give you information or do something other than what the program was originally intended to do. Metasploit comes with a utility that's called MSF Payload, and I can just do MSF Payload -H. It's going to give me help. And you can see here I've got options, I've got the payload type, I've got variables, and then I've got the different ways that we can actually output that payload. This is the help banner, and now what I want to do is I want to figure out what I can actually use for payloads. I'm going to do a list, and it's going to give me all of the payloads that it has available that it can output in these different ways. So we've got C and Perl, Ruby, Raw, we've got executables, DLLs, and so forth. Here's all of the payloads that I have available. These are all of the payloads that you would normally find in Metasploit if you were trying to run an exploit and you wanted to change the payload type. This is the same list that you would get there. What I want to do here is I actually want to do something like a shell reverse TCP. Connect back to attacker and spawn a command shell. So the first thing I need to do here is I need to figure out what my IP address is. So now I'm going to do MSF Payload, and it's Windows, and I want the options for it. The O gives me all of the options that I've got available. You remember when we were looking before at the help, there were variables that I could set on the command line. Now the options, this is the same thing if I were to do show options when I'm in Metasploit. I've got the same thing here. This is a reverse TCP inline payload, and we've got the exit function, and that's going to be a process. I have a local host and a local port. Let's leave the local port alone, and I'm going to run MSF Payload, and I'm going to use Windows, and now I want to set the local host to my local host, which is the host that it's actually going to be listening on. And I'm actually going to set it to this one, even though this actually isn't going to work given the fact that we're doing a Windows reverse shell. I'm going to set it to mine. I'm going to leave the local port alone. And in this case, just to show you what we get for output, I'm going to do C output. This is going to generate the payload, and it's actually going to generate C source code that I could then use to add different functions or different code to, and the payload would be there. Shell reverse TCP. You'll see that the source code comes up in C, and the code that I'm actually going to get is setting a couple of variables to hexadecimal codes that actually are the executable or the machine language that could actually be executed. We've got a buffer variable here. As I said, this is all of the hexadecimal here that is actually the machine code that could be dumped into memory in a particular place, and if we set the instruction pointer correctly, we would actually execute this, and this would run our reverse TCP shell. I can also do this in Ruby as an example. I could do it in Perl as well. I could also just dump out an executable that would have this particular function in it. I'm going to generate Ruby, and it's going to give me the same sort of thing here. You can see we've got the buffer, and really it just sets the buffer variable in a Ruby style. That's how you would use MSF payload in order to create payloads that you could then use to write your own exploits. Rather than having to go figure out how to create a payload, Metasploit will actually create a payload for you. Then you could actually just implement that program into your exploit code yourself. And you would have the payload that would, in this case, do a TCP shell, or there are a number of other things that you could use as well. MSF payload is good for when you're writing your own exploits and you need some payload shellcode in order to dump into the executable that you're writing. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about creating standalone executables with payloads from Metasploit. We've got this utility here called MSF payload, and we're going to use MSF payload to actually take one of the payloads that's available inside of Metasploit, and we're actually going to package it up into a standalone executable. I've got MSF payload here, and you can see that we're looking for the payload, and then we've got variables, and then we've got the type of data that we're going to get out on the other end. We've got a C language program, we've got Perl, Ruby, we've got raw. Here's an executable, which is what we're going to actually end up using. But the first thing I want to do is take a look at the available payload. I'm going to do MSF payload -L, and we're going to get all of the payloads that are available. Now, one of the things that's important is to make sure that you understand the variables that are required for a particular payload, because those are going to get packaged up, and you're not going to get an opportunity like in Metasploit to be able to set those options later on. What I want to do here is I'm going to use the reverse TCP here. I'm going to do MSF payload, and then the payload. And then I've got localhost equals 172.30.42.82, and local port we're going to say is 4444. And then this is going to be an executable, so we're just going to say X there. And now what it's doing is it's bundling that particular payload up into a Windows 64-bit executable, because you see here we chose x64, which is the 64-bit version of this particular payload. So it's bundling this up, and it's going to create a .exe here. Actually, let's do this. Since it dumped it out to the screen, what I want to do is, let's do that. I actually want to write it out to this file here. But you can see what we ended up getting was the program that just got dumped out to the screen. And this is the interpretation here in ASCII of the binary values that were actually generated to create this particular program. Now, all I have to do is file stand.exe. And I've got a Windows executable here in 64-bit. Now I've got a standalone payload, and now what I could do would be to use MSF console and actually generate a listener, and I could use those two in conjunction in doing some things that I needed to do with them. I could get this deployed on a system somewhere and then have a listener on my system in Metasploit, and they would be able to communicate, and that's how we would be able to make use of that. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about encoding and packing using Metasploit. We've taken a look at creating payloads using Metasploit, And the problem with the payloads that we're creating is that they would get caught by antivirus programs that are installed on a target machine. And of course, we don't want to get caught by antivirus that may potentially quarantine or delete the payload that we're actually trying to get executed. We've got the ability to actually encode exploits or programs. I'm going to take a look at MSF encode here. And we've got the help, and it's going to tell us how we would actually go about using MSF encode. You can see the different options we've got. We've got the architecture, we've got a list of characters to avoid, and we've got the number of times to encode the data, which is the -C here. We've got a help banner, we've got the encoder to use, and so forth. You can see also that we've got the output format here. And again, it comes in a variety of different formats and languages. What I want to do here is I want to create a payload, and then I'm actually going to dump it into MSF encode, and that's going to give us the encoded and packed program that we're looking to have. I'm going to run MSF payload. And again, I'm going to create the shell reverse TCP with my local host, and I've actually got the local port set here as well. I'm actually going to pipe that into MSF encode, and I'm going to use this encoder here. I'm going to run it through 5 times, and I'm going to generate raw output. Now, the reason for doing raw output is I'm actually going to create the executable on the very end of it. You'll see here I did raw output on the MSF payload as well. Now I'm going to do the encoding, and that's an alpha upper encoding that I'm going to do, and then we're going to run it through and do some more packing again. And then finally, we're just going to generate the executable. It's going to run through all of this. It's going to generate the payload, and then we're going to run it through the encoder to do some packing and encoding, and then finally we'll generate an executable out of it, and you'll see here that I'm calling it badexe.exe. Again, the reason for doing this is because we want to make sure that we're evading any antivirus that may be running on the target computer. And antivirus is pretty quickly going to see this shellcode that may be sitting there, and it's going to flag it, do some quarantine or whatever it is, and basically not allow us to make use of the payload. We need to be able to obscure it in a particular way, and that's what we're doing here, is we're obscuring it so that an antivirus program probably won't see it. You'll see that we did all of the work here, and now I'm going to take a look at badexe.exe, and you can see that it's a PE32 executable, which means it will run on Windows, because Windows uses the portable executable format, and this is 32 bits here. This is for MS Windows and the Intel 8386 processor architecture. So we've got the 32-bit Windows application here that we've created out of this particular payload, the shell reverse TCP. That's how you would use Metasploit, and specifically MSF payload and MSF encode, in order to do some encoding and packing. Again, you might be able to get around intrusion detection or antivirus programs. In this lesson, we're going to be talking about writing fuzzers using Metasploit. Fuzzers are actually really useful programs because they can show us where we may have vulnerable applications, or how we might go about crashing programs. Then once you've got a program that crashes, you can see whether there's a potential for exploit there. You can see I'm actually in the Metasploit directory, and I'm in Apps Pro, MSF3, Modules, Auxiliary Fuzzers. I'm just taking a look at an HTTP fuzzer. And I'm actually just going to jump up here, and you can see the other type of fuzzers that just come with it. These are all of the groups. And inside of these different groups, we've got specific fuzzers for different types of protocol. I've got DNS, FTP, SMTP, SMB, and so on. And again, I want to take a look at something that's in HTTP. What I can do is I can look at one of the programs that actually comes with it. I've got HTTP get URI long, HTTP form field, and I could take any one of these as a starting point and just copy it over, and then I've actually got a starting point for writing my own fuzzer. This just makes it a lot easier. You don't have to start from scratch at all. Just take something that's going to be similar to what you've got, use it as a starting point, and then do the changes that you want to make. I've actually written one here using one of these others as a starting point, and I've actually got it all written up here. Again, I've taken one of the framework files and used it as a starting point, so you can see we've got this file as part of the Metasploit framework, and that disclaimer is at the top. We've got the require statement here, where I'm using the MSF core functionality, and I've got a class that I've created. I'm including some different libraries, and I've got initialize, which initializes the class. And I've got register options, which is going to give me the ability to set some options inside of Metasploit. Now, what I'm really doing here is I'm actually issuing a request to the HTTP server. And what I did was I actually used the fuzz string here, and I'm actually going to fuzz the verb. So rather than get, I'm actually going to send some garbage. You can see that this is where I'm doing the put out to the web server, and the verb is being set with some random data. And I'm actually going to do the URI as some random data as well. I'm going to send some random data in as the URI. And the idea here is to see what we can actually get the web server to do. And if I were to be doing this against a Java web application, I could also be seeing what the Java web application might do with some bad data. Now I'm going to run MSF console here. And once I get in, I'm going to search for my fuzzing module. And then I can make use of the fuzzing module, I can set all of the options, and then I can just let it go. And while I'm doing that, I'm actually going to get into the system that I'm going to be running this particular attack against. Let me do a little zooming in here. Now I'm going to go log into the server just so we can see the logs and see what's actually happening. Now I'm going to go into var log Apache 2, and I'm just going to tail the access log. Over here I'm going to search for bad data, which is part of the name of the fuzzer that I created. Now I'm just going to use auxiliary fuzzers http underscore bad data. Show options. And this is the options that I actually registered, and I'm going to set my rhost to 172.30.42.55, which is this host over here. And now I'm just going to say run. And now I can see all of the garbage that's actually being sent to the web server. All of this data over here, and actually I may just kill it just so you can see it more clearly. Rather than like a GET request, I'm actually sending just a random long string here, and then here's where we're doing the URI. So the slash indicates the beginning of the URI. And I'm actually generating a 501 error in response to this. I'm getting some sort of internal server error in response to this particular application. The server's not handling this particular request very well, although it's not actually crashing, it's just generating an error response in return. What I didn't do here was actually give you the ability to specify the number of requests. That's certainly something that I could add, and I could have that be a variable. You could go 1,000, 2,000, whatever, however many bad requests you actually wanted to generate. You can extend Metasploit using different scripts, and of course they're written in Ruby, but you can write Ruby scripts to do a lot of different things inside Metasploit, and if you just plunk them into the file structure where they belong, Metasploit will find them and actually index them for you. So all you have to do is search inside the console. It will find that particular functionality or that script, and you can make use of the script from inside of Metasploit. It doesn't take a lot to actually extend Metasploit. It's really as simple as taking the functionality they've got and changing it in particular ways and creating your own scripts and just dropping them in there, and you can make use of them from inside of Metasploit.